Okay.
Great.
Then in the back, I don't know if you can see.
Yes, I can see.
And I take my knife and I cut this top muscle. Well, I've kind of wrecked this one, I can tell already. And then I can peel. Oh, I didn't get the whole thing.
So it's swelling going down and all that?
There we go.
It goes down until I overdo it.
Oh,
Which I did yesterday. And
thank you.
Okay.
You fried oyster.
Restaurant Orinoco or Inlet. You're all locals and you know where it is, but anyway, so I'm going to do a really simple dish because I love food that is really simple and you let the actual food speak for itself as far as the flavor. So I'm going to do these. These are a small to medium beach oyster that Bob Paquin provided for this demonstration. And they were a little bit muddy, so I just gave them a little rinse off to get the sand out of them. That's just so that in the cooking process the sand doesn't wind up going inside and giving you a little crunch. But oysters are really nice because they come in their own little serving dishes when you do it right too. So so at parties and that they're very simple to serve. So an oyster has, well let's just talk about oyster safety and actually sourcing oysters. Right now there isn't a plant on this side in the Powell River area to produce oysters, so you can't actually get an oyster from any oyster fishery directly in the Powell River area. It's got to go over to the island and get processed, which means it goes in the door and it comes out the door.
I was going to say, what is processing?
Yeah, it just has to, like for this type of oyster, it just has to have a tag on it so that they know when it was picked and where it was picked, and that area is safe and open. So, of course, the thing with any bivalve shellfish, that includes oysters, scallops, mussels, and clams. They're all the filter-feeding shellfish, and there's a natural plankton bloom that occurs. We know it as red tide, and it's not something that man has produced. It was here long before we were around, and probably be here long after we're gone. But they say that there's 5 factors. I was talking to a fisheries guy. There's 5 different factors that determine when these plankton are going to bloom. Now I don't have what the 5 are, and he didn't rattle them off to me either. But they need to have 3 of those 5, and then the plankton will bloom. These filter feeders will feed on the plankton, and this will be the blooming plankton as well. And they accumulate it, and that's what they use for a food source to grow and to build the shell and to build the oyster. And but in the process, they're concentrating that toxin. So what the fishery does is they test the little black piling mussels, which are the first shellfish to absorb and show any high indications of any toxins. And they take them, they dehydrate them, and they feed them to mice. Okay, and it's like the rabbit test in the old days, but this is the mouse test. They have apparently in Europe they have other tests they can do, but the most one is they feel is pretty foolproof, right? And so, of course, if the mice don't make it, we don't eat it. But once it reaches a certain level of toxicity in those black piling mussels, they close the fishery in that zone. So the coast is all zoned off, and they close them in the neighboring 2 zones as well. That's just that safety buffer. And usually the plankton blooms there's real specific places where these things will occur within any area. And so when it reaches that level where they don't consider it safe in the piling mussel, the oysters, go ahead, walk through, go ahead. The oysters don't have as high a level of the toxin as the test samples that they're doing for the mussels. The mussels are the first one to absorb it, and the last ones to release it. So that's why they're using those ones. So that means the oysters are well below that when they reach those levels of this toxin. Now this toxin is deadly, so it's a very serious business. So when you're dealing with doing any commercial fishery on it, that's what the plant, and that's why it's just bag in, tagged, and bag out. There's actually no processing. I mean, these oyster plants will also, they'll do shucking where they'll shuck the meat oysters, like when you're getting cord oysters for cooking, and then they'll shuck the shucked oyster. And I'm gonna do a recipe that when I was a kid, I used to go over to Harwood Island with Frank Roskovich and the Roskovich family, and we'd be playing on all the sandbars and trying to hold the tide back with walls of sand. Of course, we never succeeded. And Frank would go out with his bucket and collect oysters, and I'm looking, what's he doing? What do we need these things for? And then at the end of the night, he put them all around the fire in the cinders, and they popped open, and then they put some butter and some lemon and some cracked pepper on that. So I'm just going to do that. It's just I was about 4 years old, and I loved the taste, and I still remember it. And when I came across this preparation of oyster, it's as close to the campfire oysters as I've ever tasted, and it's very simple. When you steam the oyster, they don't always open, and that's not a sign that they're bad. Sometimes they're hanging on really tight, and when they finally die of being steamed, they succumb in a closed position. That doesn't mean that they're off. It's you get a different situation with mussels. Because mussels are designed to spring. Now, an oyster has they're called bivalve, meaning it's two shell, and it has a cup and a lid. So generally, when you're storing them, if you get them home from the beach, scrub them up a little bit with some water, and then store them in a container, cup down. So that if they do relax, they don't wind up losing their juice, and they'll live in a refrigerator for 2-3 weeks at least. And if you want to know, let's say you've had them in there and you want to know that they're good, if you tap on the shell, you can use another oyster. Tap on the shell, and if it has a real hollow sound, and that's a gaper, and you don't want to eat them. Now, just because the oyster's dead doesn't mean it's instantly rotten. But generally, when you're dealing with fresh oysters, if they're gaping, it means they're not alive. Just leave them. Just don't use them. But you can make a mistake, because when they come out of a really cold fridge, they're kind of in a state of like this because it's really cold, and it's like they've been on the beach with a low tide that's lasted for 3 weeks, and it's winter time and they're cold. Now they'll when you first do them, they don't move at first, but just leave them out on the counter for a while and then test them, because then they'll all of a sudden kind of wake up as they warm up a little bit, and they'll start to respond. As long as they're responding, then they're good to eat. So when I'm steaming them, I'm going to just put them. I'm going to use a wok. You can do them in a little 10-inch pan, but I'm going to do a couple of batches here, and I'm just going to put them. So you don't need very much water, because you're just getting the steaming started, because some juice will come from the oyster. You don't want them sitting there boiling either. You just want to steam them, and so you can start with very little of cooking on the oysters. I mean, they're definitely cooked, and they're cooking is one of the methods that humans use to make your food safe from pathogens. You're creating an environment that's hot enough to kill any other life in 5 minutes or less. Basically, in this scenario or at home, you can peek, and as soon as you see any of them starting to gape, then that'll be an indication that that if one of them's gaping, then they're all going to be pretty well ready. And if it's, you don't want to overcook them, but if you do find that some of them are still a little bit, they go from a translucent kind of a flesh color and with a very wiggly texture to a firmer texture, and becomes more opaque, the flesh becomes more opaque, just like an egg, off center. So I know that the inductor muscle is right there. So generally when you're shucking this way, then I'm going to go in through the shell, which might require a little breaking of the shell to get in there. I'm going to find that inductor muscle and I'm going to snip it. Now there's nothing holding the lids together. It's like, that is the inductor muscle is what we eat when we're eating scallops. That's the little white muscle. Now, and you should get a picture. Somebody's making faces over there. On an oyster, that inductor muscle, it's tough and it's not the desirable part of the oyster. And a scallop, it's big. They're big and developed, and they're tender because you got a lot of muscle. So it's not like a little tiny muscle having to get really strong and tough to do the job. So they grow big, and that's why that's the part that you eat. The actual body of the scallop is edible as well, and it can be nice to eat. You can find that there'll be grit in the gusset, so usually you'll remove the gusset. Some bacon really fine.
Yeah, you use a half shell?
Yeah, and you just keep the half shell, loosen the inductor muscle with a little towel, and I'm going to loosen it. Now you see the steam shuck, this one it was closed, but now the inductor muscle is gone, and I'll take the top valve off and show you. See, that's a really nice little steam shucked oyster. You see how it's slightly opaque in color? There's the inductor muscle, and it's exactly where I said it was going to be. It's going to be right at the 2/3 point, and there it is, right there. So you always know where to go in for it. It's 2/3 way, so it's from the 2/3 up from the heel, and there's a third in front and 2/3 right in that area. This one's got some extra fluting, so it appears that closer to the half. But that's where it lives. That's where it sits. And then what I like again with the French knife, I can get underneath it nice and easily, and just loosen that inductor from the bottom, so the oyster's free in there and moving around. And then you just take it. If there's a little, you might find a little bit of the seaweed or a little bit of shell fragment on the edge where you've gone in. Just flick it away. A little bit of shell in your diet isn't going to hurt you, but if the queen was coming, you'd want to get it all out. And then I have some lemon, and just a couple of drops of lemon. And then I brought the pepper grinder over. That's pretty coarse. And how would you like to be the first sampler?
You
can just tip. It's so beautiful to me that
it is.
You see the kind of pearl, the black and white pearl edge. And there you go.
Little butter, lemon, and pepper, and it's pretty much should be made.
Sometimes the actual oyster, you can get a great big oyster.
It's actually really, really, really nice.
At some point,
It's like poached egg. Exactly how we serve it.
basically in the same pan.
It's going to be really nice.